Tony Eastley there. Well, let's discuss defence plans for Northern Australia in more detail now. John Blaxland is a former Chief Staff Officer for the Joint Intelligence Operations in the Australian Defence Force. He's currently a Senior Fellow of Strategic and Defence Studies at the Australian National University. He joins us from Canberra. And with us from Brisbane is Adjunct Professor in the Defence and Security Program at the US Studies Centre, Russell Todd. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks,
Russell
Julie.
Todd, I might just start with you. We heard in Tony Eastley's package there saying that more funds are going to be needed, many more funds to develop Northern Australia in the way that it needs to be developed. How much money do you think is needed to develop it in a way that's going to last into the next century?
Well, how long's a piece of string, Kumi? I think there's a serious question about how much you want to do there, but the Defence Force is already employed right across the north of part of Australia, as the package indicated. There is something in the vicinity of 15,000 ADF personnel deployed across Northern Australia. They've got about 100 bases, and the estimate of the value to the economy is, well, it's uncertain, but it could be as much as $1 billion. So there's already a very significant presence, and as you point out, there is likely to be in the Defence White Paper, which will be issued later next year, perhaps some further recommendations to expand the presence there.
John Blaxland, when we talk about, and when most Australians think about our forces in the north, we inevitably think about a defensive position. Conversely, how much should or could we be viewing this as something about not just defence, but allowing us to engage with the region, with those to our north?
Oh, well, I think that's very much the case, Scott. Contrary to some of the positions that some politicians have been putting out there about the threat from countries like Indonesia, I think it's very important that we reflect on how much Indonesia has its own troubles to worry about, how internally focused Indonesia is, and how much they would actually appreciate support from Australia. And I think the infrastructure investment that we've made in the past in the north of Australia has actually already reaped dividends in terms of our ability to reach out and engage constructively following the tsunami in Aceh, off the west coast of Sumatra, and a whole range of scenarios across the archipelago to our north. But the thing is that what we need to do is actually a lot more. The report that was put out 2.5 years ago now, by former Defence Secretaries Alan Hawke and Rick Smith, the Australian Defence Force Posture Review, really made very clear the range of issues that need to be addressed to refresh the infrastructure, bolster the investment in terms of making the airfield stronger, more capable, boosting fuel storage capacity, boosting electricity capacity, and then being able to use that to constructively engage in the region across the archipelago to the north, wherever we're invited, whenever circumstances arise that would require that kind of engagement.
Dr. Blaxland, how much time do you think it would take to build up that infrastructure?
Well, I think it's a medium-term prospect. We're talking about several years of investment required. We already have some really substantial bare bases across Learmonth, Curtin, and across Tindal and Sherga, and these are really significant pieces of infrastructure that enable us to do quite a lot in the region. They really just need some updating, refreshing and further investment, lengthening, strengthening. That's probably a couple of years' worth of work to do that.
Russell Trood, you used to be a senator representing Queensland.
I was.
For those in the states north, give us some insight. How much is security and the whole issue of defence, beyond the economic injection you were telling us about before, but the general concept of security and defence, how much does that play on the minds of those in the north, and concerns about security?
Well, it's an important part of the view that many Queenslanders, particularly obviously North Queenslanders, take about their situation. The largest defence assets in Northern Australia are actually in Queensland, so it's not insignificant. Built around Townsville, around the Air Force base in Townsville, the Army base in Townsville, the naval facilities in Cairns. So there are some very significant, as John has said, defence assets in North Queensland, and for the communities up there, for particularly Townsville, the defence community is an integral part of the overall community, as is often the case right around Australia. So they add a very significant part to the economic development of the region, as well as making a very significant contribution to the defence infrastructure that Australia needs in that northern part of Australia.
Russell, Trood, so much is talked about the infrastructure needed there. I can presume that in that building time there will be a lot of jobs, a lot of materials going up to the north. For the people basically supplying the inputs, there's a lot to benefit from that growth. What about everyday people living in those two states and territory there in the north? How are those benefits going to trickle down to them?
Well, the investments will, as you say, Kumi, create jobs, and that's an important part, but it's a challenge for much of northern Australia. So there will be investments and opportunities as infrastructure is built. Hopefully there will be some spin-offs in relation to defence industries. In many parts of northern Australia there is less significant defence industry than there is in the southeast part of the country. So as the defence infrastructure grows, one would expect to see allied defence industries growing alongside it. So that provides another source of income and jobs to the community. Of course, people move into the community and they bring their families with them, so that's another source of driving of revenue. So the advantages for Northern Australia and certainly for North Queensland, as I discovered when I was a senator, are very considerable, depending on how large the infrastructure build will be.
John and Russell, you may want to respond to this as well. John, what is the effect, or at least the range of reactions in the region to the increased US presence in the top end?
Well, look, this is a good question, Scott, because I think there's a misconception here about the placement of the Marines, particularly in Darwin. Initially, the Indonesian Foreign Minister, Marty Natalegawa, came out quite critical of the initial placement of Marines there. But part of that, I think, was to do with the mishandling on the Australian side of actually giving the Indonesians the courtesy of letting them know in advance that that was our intention. Secondly, there was an internal political reason for the Indonesians to want to make this point publicly in such a way that they would be reinforcing their non-aligned movement credentials. So that's an understandable domestic political imperative. But the bottom line is that at the working level, there's really a significant appreciation for the benefits that can accrue from having Marines not far from Indonesia, but not in Indonesia, conveniently located so that they can operate with Australians and alongside Americans in such a way that they're going to benefit from it professionally in terms of their own standards and experience, but without being too closely entangled with them in such a way that they can just really maintain a bit of a distance. So really, despite the rhetoric, despite the public grimacing, at the working level there's really a lot of very positive vibes picking up there.
Dr. John Blackson there joining us from Canberra, and Russell Trood joining us from Brisbane. We so appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.